everyone. So this is the CPD for week beginning 22nd of June. Hopefully you'll all get an opportunity to watch this in the next week or so. I've broken my own rule and I haven't started with a retrieval, but it's sort of getting to that point in the school year where I thought it would be more appropriate actually to begin with a bit of reflection. So I just thought you could just take a few minutes to think to yourself, 3 things that you do now in your teaching which you wouldn't have done a year ago. Now I know we're in unusual times at the moment and teaching has had to be different, but I still think you'd be able to reflect on that and think about, even when you're planning a lesson, what is it that you think differently about that maybe a year ago you wouldn't have done. If I was to do it for myself, I would say I use much more visual organisers in lessons to aid that process of dual coding with the students. I've certainly sort of streamlined and reduced the amount of busyness on my resources. If I'm using a PowerPoint or a worksheet, I've really tried to think carefully about all of those principles of the way we present information to not distract students or cause kind of cognitive overload. And I think the way I question students has probably changed and improved, rather than I don't think I've accepted I don't know for quite a long time, but I think I would challenge students more to say it again better, use that vocabulary, tell me more about why. So a bit more probing questioning. But I mean, I'm sure everybody will be able to do the same and identify 3 things. And similarly, off the back of that, you might think about 1 or 2 things that you haven't had the opportunity to work on, but you really are looking forward to doing in the next academic year when we have that opportunity to be in front of students again. So just a bit of self-reflection really as we near the end of the academic year. So after a little bit of reflection then, the focus of this session is coming back to this idea of checking understanding. So there's a couple of new ideas and little tweaks that I'm going to put into there. But it's very much a review and a consolidation of these ideas that we've been talking about all through the year. Recently, the CPD I gave about responsive teaching, you'll see how much these ideas overlap. And hopefully you see how it all pieces together and fits together. So that's kind of the big picture and what we're zooming in on today. And many of the ideas and the strategies that I'm going to talk about are from the Teach Like a Champion book and video clips. Now, I've read a few pieces from Doug Lemov before, and I've used a couple of video clips in training and things. But I have to hold my hands up and say I'd never owned or read the Teach Like a Champion fully. I've never had the book and read it. And recently on Twitter, there's been quite a lot of talk and a little bit of controversy surrounding Doug and some of the approaches. And many of the kind of educators that I really respect and follow on Twitter really jumped to his defense and commented about how transformational the Teach Like a Champion series is, and how it's one of those books that once you've read you'll never teach the same. And I kind of thought I really should read this book. So I ordered a copy. They're actually on their 2nd edition now, because what Doug's done is gone back and visited teachers using the strategies that were shared in the first one and found that there's improvements and they're doing things better, and so he's kind of incorporated that. But what's great is that it's very simple strategies, and many of them we have been talking about in the last sort of year or so, but then supported by video clips of it in action. They're all American because he's working in American schools, but when it comes to quality teaching and therefore learning, it doesn't really matter which country you are in, it's still much the same. Yes, there's a few differences with their educational system, but the principles can still be applied. So you'll see I mentioned the book quite a bit, and I'm referring to some of his strategies, and you'll probably see me do so in future CPD as well. That's not because we think all of the strategies have to be done, and some of them wouldn't be right for our context, but that's where some of these ideas have come from. So one of the things that in the chapter in the book around check understanding, which is obviously what I'm focusing on in this session, they make the distinction between we can check understanding through our questioning and we can check understanding through observation. Now, I've never really made this distinction before, and I think probably most of the time when we talk about checking student understanding, we just assume it's questioning, it's asking them questions of some nature. But when you think about it, there's a great deal that we can do through observing them working that also helps build a really good picture of their understanding. And so there's a few ideas that I'm going to share and a couple of video clips I want to show you on that idea there about, when students are actually working, what can we observe? So underpinning all of this, and I think this is really important, in order for that checking of understanding to be at its most effective and efficient, there needs to be a culture of error. Now that sounds terrible, doesn't it? Like we're encouraging a culture of everybody getting everything wrong. And we certainly don't want a confusion where students don't know what's the right answer and what's the wrong answer. But it's much more about the culture that we create in our classrooms in terms of students not being afraid to take a risk, accepting that learning is hard and therefore this is a hard question and therefore it's highly likely that they'll make a mistake, and allowing students to talk about and own up to when they've made mistakes in their learning so they can learn from each other. And Doug Lemov suggests you need that culture of error sitting underneath your checking understanding, and then of course you take all of that into the mix. You use your observation and your questioning to find out where the errors are and the mistakes, and you've got a culture where students aren't trying to hide away from any errors, and you therefore respond to it. And obviously that links to the CPD I did recently on responsive teaching. There's no point doing all of that if you don't then adapt the rest of that lesson to respond to what you've identified and what you've found out. So I'm going to start with the questioning aspect, which is probably the one we've done most on up until now. And most of what is on that little bullet point list there is not new. The bits I think are probably slightly newer tweaks or different ideas to share today are the bits in blue. But, we've been talking for a long time about the importance of not relying on hands up, but cold calling students to sample the room. We know the importance of not just getting the answers off the students, but those probing questions, why, how, process questions. I'll remind you of something on that a bit later. We know about those high expectations. So when you're asking a question, you're asking them to say it again better. You're asking them to include the fluency of your language, your subject specialist language. And we know that we don't accept, I don't know. And I think that is really important. This idea of no opt out. I think we have to stay strong on that one. And as uncomfortable as it might feel when we go to a student and they say, I don't know, we're not going to do some sort of head-to-head, you must know, I'm going to wait until you tell me. Of course, that's not going to be comfortable or sensible. But what we can do is we can go, okay, so you need some more thinking time. I'm going to go to student over here now, and I'm going to come back to you. And then student X over here is going to tell us an answer. And I go back to that student, and it may well be that all they do is just regurgitate the answer they've just heard. But that's better than them just saying, I don't know, and not saying anything else. And it's better for a couple of reasons. It's better because they've then had to at least engage in some way in listening and repeating what's been said and using the vocabulary. And the other way, it sends a really clear message to them and everybody else that I don't know is not acceptable, and it doesn't get you away with it. Because there is a real danger if we ever accept I don't know, that student just learns very, very quickly, oh, okay, all I have to do is say I don't know, and then she won't bother me anymore. And obviously we can't have that, and it's not good for anybody. So that no opt out, I think we really have to make that concerted effort, never to accept I don't know, but in a supportive way where we give them a bit more thinking time or a bit of a scaffold and we come back to them. Or we might go, oh, okay, we need to think pair share. Let's pair up. Let's just have 1 minute, talk it through, and then I'm going to come back to you. So you allow them to draw upon the expertise of their partner. Now, I think this idea of cold calling and sampling the room, we've talked quite a lot about. And the quote at the bottom, do all of the students know all of the knowledge? That's the dream, isn't it? That we can, in a lesson, we can check every student's got the complete knowledge that we would expect them to have. The reality is, in normal circumstances, you might have 30, 32 students in your class. You can't possibly sample, or well, you can't possibly find out that every student has all of the knowledge. So of course we have to sample the room. And we do that all the time with our cold calling. We just ask a few students. And it often feels quite random. And it should, to the student, it should feel random because we want them to have this idea that at any point they might be asked. So they need to be listening, they need to be following. So of course that's not a bad thing that it feels random, but it doesn't have to be random. And actually it probably shouldn't. So in the same way that we plan our questioning, we need to plan our sample. And by that, I don't mean planning exactly who we're going to ask, because then that might feel really scripted and unnatural and just, we don't want that. But because most of us teach mixed ability, and even in a setted class, you know who your really secure in their knowledge students are, those that are in the middle and those that are more likely to have the misconceptions and are more likely to struggle. And obviously over time, you'll get to know your groups better. So in the book, Teach Like a Champion, what they suggest is that 6 would be a good number. So you're asking a question, and to sample the room, to check that understanding, you might pick 6 students. But what Lemov is suggesting is that you pick 2 from your really secure, they're a safe bet, they're going to have got it group, 2 from your middle, and 2 for your, it could be a bit uncertain amongst them. And you pick your sample, you plan your sample, because then you really are sampling the true room rather than just some of your sort of ability spectrum, if you like. And it allows you to then respond accordingly. And of course, you would make sure it's not always the same 2 students that you're picking out of each of those groups. So it just allows you to think of your class as having almost 3 sampling frames, and you're going to pick from each of those each time. And the other way I quite liked the way Doug Lemov talks about sampling and this checking the understanding is thinking about them as the responses, the student responses, as a data set rather than as individual responses. Because he gives the example of, let's say, if I ask 6 students, so I've done my sample and I ask 6 students the question, and the first 5 students give me either an inaccurate, wrong, or really confused, poor quality answer. And the 6th student gives me what I would expect, what I was hoping for, really good quality and correct. There is a danger that I go, oh, yeah, not quite, no, move on, get to the 6th student, get the answer I'm looking for, and go, oh, great, now we've got it, we're moving on. They haven't all got it, that one student's got it. So if we deal with each individual response and we sort of see it almost as I keep asking more students, it's almost like a progress, and then I get to the one I'm after and I think, right, we're good to go now. That's not responding to what I've actually found out. If I view it as a data set, 5 out of 6 didn't get it. And then I'll come to a really different conclusion, won't I? Instead of thinking, right, we've got it now, we can move on, just because the last answer I heard was a good quality one. Actually, what I'm thinking is 5 out of 6 that I sampled didn't get it. So if I scale that up to the whole class, the majority of this class have not got it. Why am I moving on? And so, yes, it shows that 6th student that I asked probably needs to move on, and probably I need to just subtly give them something else to be thinking about and working on, the next sort of challenge. But I need to reteach, I need to revisit, I need to go back, because that's true responsive teaching. So that's quite different, isn't it? So I liked that way of viewing it as a data set and of thinking about planning who your sample's going to be. The other slight tweak on there is in relation to multiple choice questions. Now, I know most of us use multiple choice questions. Many people use them as their retrieval activity, and we know we use them really effectively. But this is just a nice tweak that I think is quite powerful because it really gives you a better insight into the way the students are thinking and therefore if there's any misconceptions. So a couple of things. Firstly, they obviously pick the right answer. And if they're well designed, that will be challenging because all the answers will be similar enough for them to be plausible, but obviously only one can be right. So they have to think really hard. They identify the answer, but then you ask them, and what would be the second closest? What would be the closest to the correct answer? So you're almost picking your second best, and that's not correct, but they're really having to think and they're having to interrogate their knowledge. And you're asking, then you can ask those why questions. So why did you think that was closest to the correct answer? And some students will do it like by work backwards, and they'll go, well, that one definitely wasn't right, and I know that definitely wasn't right because of this, and that one was, and then that's the conversation which really allows you to check their understanding. That's one nice tweak. And then another nice play on the multiple choices is really around the way you would review it. So often you would do your multiple choice and then you would go through the answers, or you would get the students, right, what did you say for question 2? Oh, B, yes, B is correct, and everybody marks their own grade. Well, the danger is the students are therefore only interested, as soon as you say that the answer is B, they're only interested in I got B or I didn't get B. Actually, a different approach is you do not yet tell them what the correct answer is. You don't sample the room for the correct answer. You do it as an open question. What do we think of C? Now, C might not be the right answer. You're not suggesting it is. You're just asking them what they think to option C. And then you're going to get, well, I don't think that is it because. And that's, again, it's gleaning understanding from the students. So that's just a slight variation, really, but one I think would be well worth trying. Okay, so that's our questioning side of things. I'll show this again, but it is something I've shared with you before, and it's this idea of the importance of not just checking an answer, but sampling the room. You can't do it to every student, to further interrogate and to ask those process questions. The how did you get that? Why did you choose to take that step? Why did you choose to use that word? Because then we're really checking their understanding. And the example I gave in a previous CPD was this very simple one. If I ask whiteboard work, show me, and I ask 2 squared and everybody holds up 4, I could easily convince myself everybody has grasped the concept of squaring a number. But some of the students in that room might have just done 2 add 2. And if I ask them to square 6, they might go 6 add 2, and they're going to get the wrong answer. So they haven't grasped it at all. And I can find that out by giving them lots of examples, because then when they get the 6 squared one wrong, I know, oh, okay, you haven't quite got this yet. Or I can find that out by asking process questions, and probably best to do a mixture of both. So then let's look at the other side of it. And this is the bit that I think we all do, but we probably don't talk about as much. And that is this idea that we can really check understanding without saying a thing, by observing and by looking at students actually in action, engaging with the task that we've given them. And we know we have to be careful to distinguish between performance. When they're completing a task, they're performing. They're not learning. You can't see learning. But we can certainly help stop any misconceptions or errors in their tracks. In the book, they use a nice analogy of when you're driving, you check your mirrors. You check your mirrors every few seconds. And he uses the point of it's far better that we check the understanding of our students regularly, rather than, in the driving analogy, go to change lanes without checking your mirror, and then there's an accident, and you then have to pick up the pieces. It's the same with checking the understanding of our students regularly so that we can prevent the problem rather than then have to pick up the pieces when that's been embedded. So when we're talking about observing, yes, we're talking about watching students while they're working, but in the book, what Douglas sort of distinguishes is between watching and tracking. And now this was a really pivotal thing for me when I read this and thought this through. I thought, do you know what? I've been watching for a long time. When I'm going around the room, I'm watching and I'm seeing, oh, good, yes, you're doing what I asked you to do. So almost a behavior thing. or, oh, good, yes, you're writing an answer. That's not really that useful information. If I'm trying to gather information about how my students are doing, I don't just want to watch or check that they've followed an instruction. I really want to track. And this idea of tracking, we hear this word quite a bit in different contexts. Sometimes it's used in terms of tracking the teacher or tracking the person that's talking. That could be a student. And that's about, eyes, looking at them, really paying attention. That's about listening skills, really. But we can also talk about this idea of tracking something. I know it's a bit of an American term, but having an idea in my head what I'm looking for and then tracking it. And I'm going around the room, and as I'm looking over people's shoulder, I know what I'm looking for. So Doug Lemov talks about looking for particular success points, just one or two in your mind, you know what you're looking for in the good quality answer. So when you're peering over their shoulder, you're just looking for those key things. And also having pre-planned and thought about the potential errors or misconceptions. And so when you're looking and you're going round, you can spot them very, very quickly, and then you're intervening before it's too late. And that's quite different, isn't it, to just going around and checking that they seem to be putting pen to paper in some way. And it's highly efficient, and it needs to be efficient because you're trying to get around the room as quickly as you can so that you can sample as many students as you can. So I'm going to come out of this and show you a couple of video clips. And so the first one shows this tracking idea in action. Okay, so what I really like about that is in the just over 10 seconds that she gave the students to complete the task, she had sampled that full row at least, and she'd spotted probably something that she knew they were going to do. So she'd sort of pre-planned the error, if you like. And so there when she was looking over their shoulder, she knew what she was looking out for. She spotted it, and then she went on and responded accordingly. And her response was as simple as just reminding them or telling them it's a neutral term. It doesn't always mean it's a positive disposition. It's not all positive. Circle that word. And it was as simple as that. That was her response, or if you like, her sort of immediate intervention when she spotted a problem. But she's constantly on the move. It has to be fast paced. Otherwise, it's not going to have the same effect, because she would have only glanced over one student. Well, that one student is not necessarily representative. So the other video clip I'm going to show you is one about affirmative checking, they call it, that one. I just like this idea, but again, you'll see how fast-paced it has to be, because the last thing you want is students sat there waiting for their answer to be checked, not able to make progress and move on. But you'll see the pace at which it can work effectively.
Number 3, when you're done, raise your hand. If you get it right, I'm going to say move on. Turn the page for a second. I want you to see the next one. After I tell you to move on, you must stop after every 2 you do and raise your hand. I'll come over and check them. If you're good, you'll move on again. Stop after the next two and raise your hand. So Markel, everybody flip back. What's going to happen right now? Everybody flip back. What's going to happen right now, Markel? Beautiful. Please start. Are you ready already? Hold on, I have my key. Go. Go. You ready? Hold on. What'd you combine? Did you combine like terms? You gotta combine like terms. You jumped all the way down. Combine like terms first. You got it. You forgot to combine like terms. Do that first.
Okay, so I don't know if you heard that really clearly, but you hear him going and saying, oh, you forgot to combine like terms. You didn't combine like terms. Now, on that piece of paper he went back to get, he called it his key. That's the way you can make sure this strategy is really efficient and you can manage it at such a fast pace, because you have already pre-planned, you know what kind of errors you're looking out for and what your success points are. And you probably, if it was something where it's a right or wrong answer, you've got your answers in front of you. So at a glance, you're just like, yep, right, okay, you're good to move on. So it can be fast paced. And obviously that wouldn't necessarily work in the same way in every subject. But this idea that you're checking at certain points. He did it after every 2 questions. It might be more appropriate to do it after a paragraph or after every 5 questions, but they have to have that checked, because you're stopping them in their tracks if there's errors. Like he's picking up on it. You know, you didn't combine the like terms, so you went through the process in the wrong way. So I quite like that strategy as well. Okay, back to this idea here then. And I've mentioned show me mini whiteboards. We know how effectively we can use mini whiteboards to see what the response of the room is. Now, I said at the beginning that underpinning all of this is this culture of error and allowing the students to feel comfortable in making mistakes. And that very much is about the language of our classrooms and the culture that we create. And that takes time, of course. This is the kind of final thing, and I'm just going to show a couple of video clips. The last one is just really for my own entertainment. I just think it's just so adorable. But there is an element there that I think is worth us thinking about, and it's that tracking, it's that turning, and everybody's full attention being on the person giving the answer. But the first one shows quite nicely what can happen when you've built up that culture of error, where students are not afraid to say, yeah, I did it wrong at this stage, but now I understand I did it wrong at this stage. So I'll show you those just to finish. But before I do so, just a reminder really, of that language of our classrooms and that high expectation that we ask them to take reasonable risks. And we give them that sort of security blanket of being able to indicate in their margin, RR, if they've taken a reasonable risk, or even to say that verbally if they're not quite sure of the answer they're about to give. But we always expect them to do that and to take that risk. Okay, so I'll show you the other video clips now. So this one.
What's